Hello and welcome back to another video on obviously my YouTube channel. So I thought I would talk about one of my favourite genres. So whenever anybody asks me what's your favourite genre, I have one of two, maybe three sometimes I talk about, one of which is historical fiction. I adore historical fiction because I kind of like history. And then I love when history is kind of ad-libbed and played upon to make it seem a little bit cooler. So that's basically what historical fiction is. Now, I've read quite a bit of varied historical fiction in terms of I sometimes get obsessed with like one author or one series and then that's what I get into. Sometimes I read something that's very far in the history. Sometimes I read stuff that's quite near in history, if that makes sense. What I've tried to do here is list people, authors, books, that sort of thing, where the history is quite far back. We're talking, I don't know, more than, 10 years or something. So if we're in 2025 now, it's generally before 2015, 2010, that sort of thing. I know that's not history, but sometimes they're put in the past, or the plot is put in the past to help benefit the plot because things happened years ago. And also some of these are like set in like World War One and before that and things like this. I also actually looking down, a lot of it's set around World War One, World War Two, and that kind of in the 1900s sort of time, the 20th century. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be looking at some of my favorite historical fiction. There's probably loads more that I'm not going to mention that I probably will mention at some point in other videos where I say I love this book and you're like, well, that's historical fiction, but you didn't mention the videos. Like, yeah, because I've just picked these off my shelf as ones that stood out to me straight away. There's probably some sitting right behind me that you're thinking, that's a great historical fiction, why is not mentioned that? Who knows? Either way, let's get into it. So my first one is one I cannot talk about historical fiction without mentioning, and that's Kristen Hannah. So Kristen Hannah is probably at the moment my favourite author. That's quite a big statement. I think I might retract that. But I would feel quite confident if somebody said, is Kristen Hannah one of your favourite authors right now? Saying absolutely. Kristen Hannah has an incredible way of writing these powerful, strong women that is so engaging. It kind of is these hidden women throughout history who never get talked about because women never really get talked about in history. It's always the men are the heroes. The men do the amazing things, this sort of thing. Whereas Kristen Hannah likes to highlight the women that have done incredible things. Throughout her different books, they're set in different periods. I've read 4 at the moment. The first one I read was The Four Winds by Kristen Hannah, which is set years ago. I think it's set in the 1930s during America's Great Depression in the Dust Bowl, which I think is a part of America that's meant to be very dusty. I don't know. I'm not that well geography knowledged. Wow, I can't speak either. So, but that's there. It's about a woman who loses her husband, bit of a plot spoiler, huge plot spoiler, and has to look after the children by herself in this Great Depression, horrible times. But it's incredible. It's powerful. It's heartwarming and also heartbreaking, which is I think a theme with all of Kristen Hannah's books. They leave you emotionally ruined. You're like, I cannot help but be obsessed with these main characters. I cannot help but absolutely love them. So that one's set in the 1930s, as I said, going through that kind of growing up with the children being like, okay, we don't have a dad figure anymore. Is our mum good enough to look after us? Are we gonna have to step up? Where's the finances coming from? What's the plan? Is there a better life outside of here? That sort of stuff. That's what's going on. That was my introduction to Kristen Hannah and absolutely loved it. There was then The Nightingale by Kristen Hannah. Now this is set during World War II when essentially 2 women live very different lives throughout the war. We have Vianne and Isabel, they're 2 sisters separated by years and experience, by ideals and compassion and circumstance, each embarking on their own dangerous path towards survival, love and freedom in a war-torn France. It's a heartbreakingly beautiful novel that celebrates the resilience of the human spirit and the endurance of women. Apparently it's going to be a major motion picture. Is it already a major motion picture? I don't know. Has this already come out? I don't know. Anyway, basically one of the women goes off and she starts to save pilots who have been downed during the World War, which is actually illegal. You shouldn't be doing that, but she's doing it because she's a good human being. The other one is a wife at home who looks after her family, and 2 very different portrayals of powerful women during that time and the importance of their roles and making sure that the society kept running whilst also things were going off in war. 2 very important roles. Loved it. This is The Nightingale. Then I read The Women, which may be my favourite of hers, I think. The Women is, I think her most recent one came out last year. This one is set in the backdrop of the Vietnam War. A woman again wants to go off, her name is Frankie, to be in the Vietnam War as a nurse, and her family are like, what the hell are you doing? You're a woman, you can't go to war. Men go to war, men are heroes, blah blah blah. That's the narrative. She comes back, people don't appreciate it because she's again a woman. Only men were veterans, women weren't at war, blah blah. That's the basic narrative of the whole book, and it's very powerful. It's very well played upon. Very well written. As I said, you end up absolutely adoring Frankie. You end up kind of loathing but also loving her father and her mother, and there's this complicated relationship between her mother where her mother definitely wants to show her that she loves her and she cares for her, but at the same time is grown up in a society where mothers are quite strict and cold with their children. I don't know. Absolutely loved it. Another Kristen Hannah banger. And then very finally, we had The Night Road, which is by far the most recent. I would maybe not even class this as historical fiction. This is set, I think, in like the 2000s-ish sort of time. People are children. They make a big mistake. Then they come back later on in time and they have to deal with the ramifications. It's basically that. There's some children who are friends. One comes from a very different upbringing to the other two. The other two have a mother who's very aspiring, very kind of overbearing, wants to get involved in their lives, wants to help them along the way. And then something happens and big things happen. All of them are brilliant. Kristen Hannah, historical fiction legend. Read everything by hers. I want to read more. There's The Whalebone Theatre by Joanna Quinn. This is a standalone book that is actually Joanna Quinn's debut novel, and I was so impressed with. This was actually a book I read last year. I think it was one of my follower book picks and ended up being one of my favourite books of the year. It was brilliant. It's basically about a child who grows up alone and then gets a new family member, then gets some siblings, and the siblings then become her best friends, and she grows up with them, and then one day they find this whalebone carcass on the beach and they use it to open up a theatre, and then they go off to war at different times and experience different lives at war. It's all fantastic. It's all very powerful. In a similar vein to kind of Kristen Hannah, whenever we do historical fiction like this and it's focused around war and people dying and people losing things, you can get very emotionally attached. Now, so I found myself doing that with The Whalebone Theatre, a brilliant, simply brilliant debut novel by Joanna Quinn. This is set, as I said, during World War II. I believe it's World War II, not World War I. World War II. And as I said, based around mainly these three people and the very different lives they live as a result of the war, with the male going off and fighting in the war and the women staying home and doing different things, that sort of thing. Very, very good. Right up my street. Loved it. Another great historical fiction recommendation. We then have another Quinn, no relation, Kate Quinn. There might be a relation, no idea. Probably not. Either way, The Rose Code. I went to Bletchley Park last year, I think now, and became obsessed with the whole idea of the code breaking and all this sort of stuff. And then I found this book. My mother-in-law had said she'd already read it and said it was brilliant, so I picked it up. It's fantastic. Basically, it focuses on the lives of, I think, 2 or 3 women during the Bletchley Park incident. So if you don't know what that is, during World War II, there were some codes going around, and Bletchley Park was a place dedicated, this very secretive kind of, no one knew about it, no one could talk about it. If they worked there, they had to lie about where they worked sort of place. They was trying to break these codes. You had the Wrens, who were the women who were receiving the codes and then translating them. And then when any new kind of codes came along, you had these men, some of the smartest people involved. In fact, I think J.R.R. Tolkien, the guy that wrote The Lord of the Rings, was invited along at one point, but I think he declined. Either way, you then had some very impressively intelligent people trying to work out the codes, which I think apparently took years off the war. Apparently it blocked off a lot of what Germany were going to do and saved, as I said, a lot of lives in the process. And this tells a story of the Wrens, the kind of hidden discussions going on there, and their lives both during the war, kind of before, during, and then after the war. And as a result of them being Wrens, a result of some of the people they meet along the way, there's also a fantastic twist in here. So it's just good. It's brilliant. I loved it. I do want to read some more Kate Quinn at some point because this really got me onto her. Okay, this is fantastic. She also apparently has a book about a female sniper who was considered one of the greatest snipers of all time. I love books about people that we'd never heard of, predominantly women, because women aren't talked about in history, as I said with Kristen Hannah. Those, I think, are all fictional in terms of their premise. I don't know. They might be based on some fact. Obviously, the settings are fact, that sort of thing. I don't know how much fact there is in the actual individual characters, their lives, that sort of thing. Again, similar situation with this, but I think they're all kind of based on factual, real-life people. I don't know. Either way, really cool. Another absolute recommendation from me. The Rose Code by Kate Quinn. Then another favourite author of mine is CJ Samson. Now, I don't have these in order and I don't even have the complete collection, but CJ Samson, I think, was probably one of the first historical fiction series I actually properly got into. I had done a little bit of historical fiction in terms of, oh yeah, I kind of get it. But then somebody brought me onto this and said, no, there's this banging series about this lawyer from around when King Henry VIII was around in like the 1500s, going around solving these kind of like mysterious things happening. And throughout the books, those things that mysterious are getting bigger in terms of who they involve. So initially it's kind of these smaller crimes, this kind of one town has this thing going on and he's got to solve it. And then it's like this plot against the whole of England by the end of it, and it's fantastic. I have Tombland here, which is actually a place right near me. It's where there was the Ket's Rebellion, all this sort of stuff. So that's quite interesting. I do want to get to it. I've got this big issue at the moment where I've not read like book 4. I've got 5, 6 and 7, and I'm really into reading series in order, but we'll go. Either way, as I said, they're set around a chap who is a lawyer, Matthew Shardlake, and and his journey throughout different things. Now, he's actually a hunchback, so he actually has kind of like a disability, which I find a really interesting aspect because he didn't need to throw that in, but he has, and it is mentioned and is referenced, but it doesn't ever hold him back really. But then there are moments where he's kind of like bathing because he has to because of his back, and there's moments where he gets even more in pain, these sort of things. But it's about the fantastic characters he meets along the way. Quickly within the first few books, he has one assistant who needs to go off and do another thing, so he gets another assistant, all this sort of stuff. And you also meet some really cool real life characters along the way, such as Thomas Cromwell. King Henry VIII is referenced obviously quite a lot in here. Some of the princesses and queens that are involved in here, all this sort of stuff, some of the high political figures, all that sort of stuff is in here. Brilliantly written, really engaging, some incredibly accurate, I don't know, but presume accurate historical knowledge in here as well. So you really feel immersed. You really feel like you're in the 1500s. The dirt, the filth, the politics, the danger, the uncertainty, the religion, all that sort of stuff is in here. It's really, really engaging. All set in England, obviously, it makes it even more applicable to reading it for me. I mean, I live now in 2000s, so not so applicable, but you get what I mean. Either way, really, really good. So if you're into historical fiction, you've not yet heard of CJ Sampson, there's a whole series here. Unfortunately, CJ Sampson died, actually I believe it was either this year or the end of last year, just before the Matthew Shardlake TV series came out, which is such a huge shame. I hope they do kind of carry it on. I don't know if they are, because I don't know if it did that well critically, but I do hope they carry on because I do want to get into that because I think that'd be really cool. If not, these are fantastic. I know he's got some other books, but I've never checked those out, but this Matthew Shardlake series is brilliant. Another absolute banger of historical fiction is Lonesome Dove. This was a book I've talked about a few times on here now because it shocked me with how good it was. I am not a big Wild West fan. I mean, I've played Red Dead Redemption and absolutely adored that. Red Dead Redemption 2, it was fantastic. This was really kindly sent to me by somebody who said, it's one of my favourite books of all time. Please, will you read it? And I said, absolutely. Technically, I don't think it's the first in the series, but you don't have to have read any of the others in the series to understand anything's going on. It's set around a small cast of cowboy characters who live in the West back in, I don't know, like 1890s America or something like that, or late 1800s America. And they are essentially traveling, set in the 1880s, there we go, traveling across America. They decide that they need to travel to go somewhere else. Along the way, horrible things happen. As I said, the start of this book very much felt like, okay, we're just a Western here. We've got some quite obnoxious people. We've got like a lot of poverty. We've got kind of a lot of odd things going on here. But then there was a moment in the book where there's like quite a few powerful chapters in the book where the characters that you despise start to do things that you actually quite like. The characters you thought were a bit weak and feeble start to stand up for themselves. The relationships and the kind of romances that go on here that you think I'm not that interested in actually start to get quite deep and quite interesting. And it quickly becomes a fantastic human story. This is one of those books, and I think I've said it a couple of times, that seems to tick a lot of boxes. You've got big twists in here. You've got character arcs. You've got the baddie. You've got the good people. You've got romances. You've got people you really despise throughout the whole thing. You've got people that you despise and then end up loving. Vice versa. You love and end up despising. All of this sort of stuff. It all happens in here. You've got journey. You've got loss. You've got found fatherhood and new romances, everything. It's brilliant. It's such a good book. Set in the West, as I said, some really good, interesting, like proper cowboy characters. My only note would be if you're a big audiobook listener, I listened to this on audiobook and really struggled with it because I think the copy I had, I don't know if there is only this copy, but the copy I had was in really poor quality. I got it from, I think it was either Kobo or Audible, but really bad quality. And some of the accents, especially kind of the strong Western accents, with the kind of mix of poor quality and the strong accents, I really struggled to listen to what they were talking about. So that's my only small gripe or small warning. If you're going to pick this up, do pick it up on the physical book or see if you can get a higher quality audiobook. I don't know. Either way, such a fantastic book. I can see why that person said this is one of their favourite novels of all time. It's by Larry McMurtry, by the way, I didn't mention. As I said, it is part of a series, and I'm not sure if it is the second. My understanding is that there were prequels put out as well, so I think that confused people. I don't know if this was the first, then the prequels came out and they became the first, or whether this came out, there were already books, it came out the second, and then there was a prequel to the number one. I don't know. I've confused myself just speaking there, so good luck finding out. Either way, give this one a go, because everybody raves about this one. Even if the other ones aren't any good, this one's meant to be fantastic, or is fantastic. So, Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. Could not recommend it more. And then finally, and by no means least, I've got another series or another selection by an author, and that is Taylor Jenkins Reid. Now, Taylor Jenkins Reid is also one of my favourite authors because what she does is she, again, writes historical fiction about women who are kind of pop figures. Now, these are proper actual fiction. These aren't kind of set in like with Kristen Hannah, where they're all set around a specific thing that happened in history and we're just reading about a fictional person's experience of it. These are very much fictional things. So, Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo focuses on the story of a very famous actress called Evelyn Hugo, essentially goes through 7 husbands, and the reasons for that, she's getting interviewed by somebody who she only ever wanted to interview her, and at the end you find out why. Really powerful, really good fun. I would probably say that's one of the best of hers. You then have Daisy Jones and the Six, which focuses on a band from the 70s or 80s who go through some turmoil. There is basically the Six, and then Daisy Jones comes along, she improves the band, but then there's relations between her and the main guy, but he has a wife and all this sort of stuff, and it's fantastic, told purely through interviews with the band. And if you listen to the audiobook, it's an entire cast for every single different member of the band, which is fantastic. Malibu Rising, I think, is probably one of the weakest. This focuses on the children of a famous rock star who essentially they then struggle to get on with life because he's a famous rock star. He's a bit of a dick. What's really interesting in all of these actually is they all feature within them. So for example, the rock star that this is based on, kind of not based on, but the parent of the children in this one features in Evelyn Hugo's books. He's at a party that she goes to. We've then got Daisy Jones and the Six, as I said. I think he's referenced there as well in that. Just all really interesting in the world. And then we have Carrie Soto is back, which focuses on a tennis star. Think kind of Serena Williams. This powerful, incredible tennis player who has gone on to win everything. Then this big tennis player comes out and starts to do incredible things and is up for breaking a record. So she comes back out of retirement to do it, but she's old and everyone's like, you can't do it. And yeah, it's a great story. Love it. But they're all set in the past. So they're all set in this kind of historical fiction element based probably loosely on somebody you could think of. Apparently, Daisy Jones and the Six, that people reference a band, I don't know if it's Fleetwood Mac or someone like that, are very similar to that. You've probably got Malibu Rising with the parent who is a rock star who's a bit of a horror to his children, is probably very relevant to a lot of rock stars who were into bad things. Carrie Soto is back, as I said, there's references there to famous female tennis players. And Evelyn Hugo, there's many famous stars throughout acting guild that would probably be referenced to there. So that's my last on the list. That is Taylor Jenkins Reid, a great historical fiction author. As I said, very much more on the fiction than kind of historical accuracy there. So those are my favorite historical fiction books. There are probably more out there that I've read that I've completely forgot off the top of my mind that were fantastic. And I'm sure there's loads in the comments you could go ahead and say. As I said, there may be something sitting behind me right now that I've not noticed that you say, that's brilliant, why has no one mentioned that? Feel free to mention it. I could do another video if I see some more at some point if you want me to. Let me know if you're a historical fiction fan. It's such a fun genre because, as I said, if you're interested in any kind of history, if you're interested in, oh, this kind of figure is really cool, and then you find historical fiction about a person who was around or is featured in the same kind of era as that person, it's such a fun thing to read about. And you're like, oh cool, that person's mentioned, or oh wow, that thing happened, in more detail about that thing. I love it. I'm a big history buff. I love documentaries. I love ancient history. I love quite recent history. I love kind of like lords and kings and things like that, and the politics of things. The actual politics I'm less interested in, like recent historical politics, that sort of stuff. Yeah. But big political moments that change the way that we work as humanity, I'm very interested in. Anyway, that's an aside from everything else. Hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoy historical fiction. If you haven't yet, drop a like, drop a comment, and if you have not yet subscribed, I need to go feed my cat. I would really appreciate that to subscribe, because then I could feed him more, or her more. Both of them, I've got a boy and a girl. They would then be fat, and everybody loves a fat cat because they're cute. Bye!